When I talk about this, usually I ask the question, who uses Facebook or Twitter, Instagram? Depends on the nature of the audience, so also depends on their age. So if they're people like me, I quickly change and ask, okay, who uses an ATM? Who plays computer games? Who checks in at an airport at an online kiosk? That kind of stuff. And the reason I ask that is because most of us do, right? But I follow that question with a simple one, and that's, how many of you received an email from the CEO of the company who was rolling out that new piece of technology? How many of you attended his town hall to talk about it? How many of you received a memo or instructions or some kind of communication that said that this technology was coming out, that it was something that you should use, and let's all get on board, and by the way, here are the instructions to use it. So when I ask that question, there are not a lot of hands that go up. In fact, normally zero. And the reason it's zero, and the reason that we actually use that technology, is because we're either interested in it, we understand how, it's something that we can see the benefit of, and so what that then leads me to really start thinking about is the stats on change programs and how come they're not successful. If you talk to a lot of the big consulting firms, they talk about the fact that you have 70% of change programs that fail, and yet in real life, in the real world, we get out there and we use all of this new technology, we get on board and we actually kind of enjoy using it, and we didn't get the memo. So it's something that tells me there are some clues in that that we need to apply at work to be able to get the same kind of results, to use the corporate word, to get user adoption. So how do you know to adopt new technology? Well, normally it's the kids, or the guys down the road, or somebody, a friend, an influencer, starts talking to you and says, oh, this is a great piece of technology that you should use, or boy, it was so much quicker to check in at the airport on a kiosk, or use your app on your phone to pay for your parking. So the key word there is influencers, right? Somebody's influencing you. Again, you didn't get a memo, but somebody's telling you that it's okay to get on board with this technology. The other thing is, and you think about the lady who stands next to the kiosk at the airport and it shows you how to use it, the guy in line, or the guy, if you're me, the guy in the street that you ask, how do I use this app to pay for my parking? But they're the coaches, right? There's somebody who's coaching you to be able to use the technology. And so why do I talk about this stuff and why do I bring it up? Because coaching and influencing are probably two of the clues in the real world that when applied at work and built into a program to get people to change their behaviors. And if you think about it, leaders at every level, what are you in the business of? You're in the business of changing, shaping, implementing behaviors. And so it's that coaching and that influencing role that becomes critical to getting people to adopt and do something new, do something different than what you wanted them to do before. So there's really clues to successful change just about everywhere that you look in society. And if you follow that thought about society and you say to yourself, okay, what is it that we can learn from getting people to do something en masse in society that we can apply at work? Probably one of the best things to take a look at is social movements. I use this phrase all the time. How come people will take to the streets for what they believe in, but find it hard to get out of bed and take to the street that takes them to work? Well, it's just not that interesting, right? And there's not a lot of other people encouraging you, and there's not a lot of interest in it. You don't feel like it's a cause. You don't feel like there's any support around it. And so the whole kind of principle of getting out of bed and being rah-rah about going to work to learn that new technology that my boss wants me to learn falls a little bit flat. So what can we do to basically jazz that up? Well, let's take a look and let's dissect a social movement and how you get a social movement in society to happen. One of the first things is somebody's talking about something that tweaks your interest, that means something to you, that is relevant to your world, right? And there's something that ultimately becomes a little bit of a cause. It becomes interesting because you can relate to it and you can say to yourself, okay, this is something that's important to me. So clues are everywhere in society, and you have to take those clues and say to yourself, what am I going to use at work to be able to really create that same kind of feeling that this is relevant and this is meaningful to me. So I guess it's that there's a story that's worth getting involved in. The other thing, there's like-minded souls. You know, there are the people around you who are starting to think about this as well, and so it makes it okay to get involved. And so again, you have to think of these clues and say, how do I bring some of that making it okay to get involved to the workplace? How do I get people to connect with one another over something new? How do I make this relevant to everybody at work? There's also usually a champion, right? Somebody who's really leading the parade, somebody who you can say, okay, I look up to them, they're getting involved, this must be interesting, there must be something here that I should be getting involved in, or at least listen to. And that champion usually has information, other resources, and a knowledge base that becomes of interest to you. A couple of the other things that you see in social movements, you know, there's the ability to see progress. You start to see 1, 2, 10, 20, 100, 1,000 people getting on board, so you can see whether the momentum is building. It also kind of gets measured, right? There's this kind of inherent KPI system where you can see whether what it is that you're interested in is having the right impact. And impact is a really, really interesting word as well, because you want to be able to show people that they're having an impact. So again, clues are everywhere in society. And so what are the clues that you can take and say to yourself, how does this relate to work? How do we get a bunch of people who this morning had no interest in getting out of bed and zooming onto that road to work, to really take to the street and think to themselves, boy, I really want to get involved in this today. And there's got to be some lessons learned from society and the type of things that happen around social movements. A lot of it is around communication, but remember, communication is less about the act of communication and more about the outcome. It's about the confidence that gets built from the communication within the individuals that you're communicating to. It's also the two-way street. It's the ability to have a voice and communicate in return, and to feel that your voice is being heard. So again, society is full of these clues, and what are the clues that can be relevant to work? So some of those other clues are things like, how can I actually show that this is making a difference? And generally it's by collaborating with the people around you, and the people around you talking about the same sort of thing and being able to demonstrate that this is making a difference. It's going back to measurement, it's the fact that you can trace. There is a traceability element. And there's also the whole recognition, you know, a pat on the back, a job well done. People are talking about this and saying, okay, this is now interesting, and I can see where this is going and what's happening from it. So if we keep with this theme of what happens in society and what's happening in the real world and how that can be relevant to the workplace, then there's a couple of other things that we should think about. One of them's kind of interesting given the maintenance issue on my aircraft last night. But you know, every aircraft has to land, right? So in that world, we talk about 100% is the target. And it's not okay to aim for 99%. You can't have, you know, 1% of all aircrafts fall out of the sky and kill people. You can't have bridges fall down. You can't have holes in roads. You know, there's a lot of our society where 100% is 100%. And if you follow that thought forward and say, okay, how does that relate to work? Most people will say to me, it's impossible. You can't always get 100%. And that may be so. But the difference between setting up the mindset of 100% and setting up the mindset that it's okay to get 85%, that has a big impact on the performance levels that happen at work. Like it or not, that becomes the standard, and that becomes the okay standard to say, I got my 85%, I can go home now. Or I got my 85%, I don't have to worry too much about the gap. When you use a 100% mindset, you start to say, what is it that's causing me not to get the 100%? And you do something that we talk about, which is variance management. And that variance management should be a natural part of every day. It should just be how you conduct business. It should be a way of actually saying to yourself, oh, I need to take a look at what the barriers are to the 100% and then remove them, right? Then I need to collaborate with my team, with people outside my area, with whoever can help me close the gap between 85 and 100. So it's that 100% mindset that you're after. Every aircraft has to land. It's almost like saying a mosquito net that has one tiny little hole is never going to protect you. And so it's not okay to be less than 100%. And again, clues in society, they're everywhere. Taking those from society and saying to yourself, how can I take those to work? That to me is a whole part of the conversation around the future business is still about people. It's how do you engage, how do you enable, how do you energize people to take a lot of this stuff from the real world and apply it at work. So final thought, and really just to give you a couple of sound bites to think about, rather than have to watch an individual on a video for an hour. But here's a final thought for you. Now I want you to think about the whole concept of hacking, as in IT systems are hacked. And here's the clue in society that might be applicable to work. When you hack, when hackers go to work, they're not looking through the traditional lens that we look through from within the business. They're looking at the end result. How do I get to the end result? How do I break through this without using any of those systems, processes, protocols, policies, whatever? How do I completely ignore all those behaviors and crack through everything and get to the end result differently? And that's almost the way that you want to look at performance improvement, right? You want to put a completely different set of eyes, a different lens through, you want to look through a different lens to be able to say to yourself, what is it that we could do that would completely hack this process, this behavior, this way of working, this culture, this whole department, whatever it is that's the scope of your improvement program. How do you hack that to get a completely different end result and to get one that is highly collaborative, that uses experts from across the business to be able to engage in the concept of improvement, that uses leaders at every level and develops leaders at every level? How do you really engage, enable, and energize people to get performance improvement that is a step change different from what you've gotten in the past? And I would leave you with the thought that one of the things that you might want to consider is taking a look through the lens of actually hacking the processes, the ways of working that you're wanting to, or the results that you're wanting to improve. We often talk about a process called aerial mapping that helps do that. It is almost, if you think about a car trip, you're mapping the terrain before you get on that trip, and you know exactly where you want to go. Well, that's because you've looked at it from end to end. You haven't looked at just that street. You've looked at how the streets all join together and where things fall between the cracks. You've got your kind of pit stops, and you know where you're going to go, and the whole structure is visible. And so it's that aerial mapping view, the end-to-end enterprise, all that stuff that often falls through the cracks from other departments, other areas, other people outside of your control. All of that needs to be mapped out. and then consider how you're going to really hack those results and get a step change from where you were before. So it's really just a couple of really simple things to think about. Nobody sent a couple of billion people. Is it a couple of billion now who use Facebook? I can't recall, maybe a billion. But that's a big number. And nobody sent them a memo. But everybody got on board. Everybody uses it. Maybe not everybody, but you get that flavour. So what can we learn from the way that technology or new ways of working gets rolled out, not in a corporate setting? What can we learn from the way that society gets behind a movement? The way that people take to the streets for what they believe in, and then what can we learn from the guys who completely go around the way of working to be able to access and change the process or systems in place today. So I hope it's something that gives you a little bit of food for thought, a really quick and simple conversation, and I look forward to sometime in the future perhaps talking about this in a little bit more detail and how it really relates to your world and what you're up to at the moment. Thank you.